Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassandra Etienne, Assistant Director at the Center for Cooperative Media. Welcome to this afternoon's panel on COVID-19, hearing loss, and the impact on New Jersey schools. 3 years since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, New Jersey schools are still grappling with learning loss and disrupted classroom environments. And based on New Jersey student learning assessments conducted by the Department of Education, students lost a reported 7 years of progress during the pandemic. These tests revealed declined proficiency rates across all student demographics in subjects, particularly in English, language arts, math, and science. So the data itself is alarming, but only tell part of the story of how New Jersey classrooms have been impacted by the pandemic. And today's panel discusses learning loss and issues such as mental health, accessibility, and other socioeconomic factors that have stressed teachers, students, and their family members too. Plus, we'll get into some community response and the state's efforts to address these issues. Our host for this panel is Tina Kelley, Senior Education Reporter for NJ.com. And we're also joined by panelists Dr. MinSoo Kim-Bossard, Associate Professor of Early Childhood Education at the College of New Jersey, and Debbie Esposito, Project Director of START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities, that's STAN Parent Advocacy Network. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here today. This event is part of the Not Your Same Old Sources series, which features experts from the Diverse Sources database. It's a publicly available list of experts of different races, ages, genders, ethnicities, in an effort to encourage journalists to expand their Rolodexes and become more inclusive in their reporting. This panel is presented by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University in partnership with NJ.com and New Jersey Ethnic and Community Media, and event sponsor Princeton University's Office of Communication. Before we get underway, I'll turn it over to Joe Amditis from the center with just a few reminders about our time together this afternoon. Thanks again, everyone.
Hi, folks. Just a quick note. I know there's a lot of you in here, so we'll try to handle all of the interactions and everything that you put in the chat. We're going to be keeping an eye on the chat throughout this entire session to make sure that we capture your questions and present them to our wonderful speakers today. I will also be working in the background to make sure everybody is working technologically sound. So if you have any issues, you can DM me by changing the little blue drop down that says everyone by the chat message window to my name. And that will be, you'll be able to send a direct message to me. Just make sure you change that back when you want to send messages to everyone and vice versa. So if you have any issues, you can just DM me there in the chat. I will turn it back over to Cassandra, but I will let you know that we are recording this now, and you will everybody who registered for this event will receive a recording, an auto-generated transcript, a summary of the meeting, and any notes, resources, or links shared in the chat or discussed by our panelists today. So I will fade into the background again, and Cassandra, please kick us off.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And I think that's it for me. I'm eager to get into the discussion. So Tina, please take it away for us.
Great. Thanks for including me today. My name is Tina Kelley. I'm Senior Education Reporter at NJ.com, the Star Ledger. And I've been on the beat for a year and a quarter. In a previous life, I was actually a hyperlocal journalist. I worked at the New York Times for 10 years and helped launch The Local, which was Maplewood, Milburn, and South Orange. So my heart is with hyperlocal journalists, and may your business model thrive and save the Republic. I missed out on the deep reporting during COVID. I was writing a book on a transformative high school model. So my hats are off as well to the folks who were in the trenches covering it during its most scary times. But I am definitely writing about how educators are trying to clean up the pieces, pick up the pieces and put them back together. So my next story is on student behavior and how districts are working to address it and improve it. I was hoping that would be out in time for today, but it's still being edited, but it'll be out soon. And my goal for today is to have everybody's questions asked. So please use the chat for stuff that you want to know. And I'm going to ask if Debbie would start off talking a little bit about what she has seen in the aftermath of the pandemic. I have spoken to Peg Kinsell of SPAN for the article I'm doing on student behavior, and she was hugely helpful. So I am always indebted to your organization for providing insights on how to get the best education possible for your students with special needs. And I'd like to hear your perspective on what the downstream ramifications of the pandemic have been.
So wow, that's a big topic.
Sorry.
No, it is. And I have to, full disclosure, in addition to being director at START, I'm also in my own township a school board member. So I work on my districts. I was elected to my district school board last year. I'm a new school board member. So it's been really eye-opening. And behaviors has been a real topic. And so actually, and this insight actually was provided by a high school student in one of our high schools, who pointed out that a lot of the freshmen and sophomores that are in high school now, this year or this past year, missed their entire middle school experience, right? Because of COVID. And so we all know that middle school is really a crucible, right? In terms of helping kids mature and grow up. They're kind of transitioning from that being a kid to kind of being a teenager, and that 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And so the kids that came in this year to high school were kids, like I said, that had missed that experience. And so a lot of the behaviors they were seeing were really middle school behaviors that were being seen in high school. Mm-hmm. And that was really eye-opening to me when she said this. And this was, from one of our high schools. We had a conversation with one of our high school students. And that's just one example. I mean, you can kind of, take that example and put it, to the kindergartners or the first grade students that missed, that came in and had missed preschool and kindergarten. A lot of kids that just missed these very important transition pieces. And so, as a result, we saw a lot of behaviors. One of the school districts that I worked with, related to me that some of the first graders were coming in not toilet trained, and that's huge, right? That's huge. Not even talking about just the behaviors and learning how to act in class and take turns and stand in line and all those things that we learn as, kindergartners and in preschool to make us ready to be first graders. They weren't even toilet trained. And so these kinds of things are things that we take for granted, but were really severely impacted by, 2 years or year and a half or 2 years, depending on where you lived, of being at home. And, so those are some of the things we're seeing. And we've had schools with varying amounts of success in addressing those things. And that's where I think the conversation is, what are the schools doing to address those things? What are we doing to mitigate these circumstances? What resources are available? What resources are we making available to parents? How are we accommodating parents of students with disabilities? How are we accommodating all students? How are we accommodating students that maybe don't have the financial or social resources to, take their children to therapies that they need, So that's why the conversation around social emotional learning in schools has become so important, because, that has to be embedded in our education, because that social emotional piece has just become such a huge factor in terms of preparing our students to learn. And I could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time. But yeah, so these are the things we're seeing: that social emotional piece, the behaviors, the missing transition time. I think that these are things that we weren't really prepared for, and that have become huge challenges. And I think that the important thing is how schools, different schools addressing these challenges and how they are assisting parents to address them.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. That's really interesting. That I had not heard that about potty training and being able to use the bathroom. MinSoo, can you talk about how your experience and what you've seen in changes at the college level, and also when you're dealing with preparing teachers to go into new teachers to go into this brave new world? What have you taken away from the changes, and what are you noticing?
Teacher education, I think, went through a lot, just like any other fields, preschool up to 12th grade. I think teachers, administrators, family members, I think, had a lot on their plate trying to keep their children learning. And we were in the same boat in higher ed. So with teacher preparation, teacher education, especially, one of the key pieces that's really critical to training and educating a good teacher is student teaching. So we couldn't do student teaching in person for a couple of years because of COVID. And the restrictions were not necessarily the same. It varied from district to district. When all the schools were shut down, some student teachers, they would do student teaching from their home. They were permitted to log on to either Google Classroom or Zoom, whatever platform the school was using to do student teaching. And you can imagine teaching a bunch of kindergartners, 15, 20 kindergartners on, Google Classroom or Zoom. It's very, very challenging, to say the least. And if you think about that having an accumulative effect, sophomore students who would have had a 1 day a week at a school, observing, interacting with students, they didn't have the experience junior year. And then when they get to their senior year, when they complete their student teaching online as well, and then they apply for jobs and go out to schools, whether it's conference level, classroom management skills, they would have been able to practice and put in place. All those things could not happen. So in teacher education, we really had to think about creative ways to address the lack of experience that pre-service teachers weren't having. So whether it's having teachers come in to talk about how they were troubleshooting different issues that were coming up, or trying to get pre-service teachers as close as possible to the actual field of teaching with students. So I think we're in transition, without masks, and just adjusting back to placing students in the field, in schools where they can interact with students and whatnot. But as Debbie mentioned earlier, I think the provisions were very different for student teachers, depending on which school or school district the student was placed in when everything was shut down. Some student teachers had to drive into school to do the virtual teaching in the school building. Sometimes they would have to just switch back and forth constantly, online teaching, in-person teaching, hybrid teaching. So I would say it was very, very, very far from optimal experience that we should provide our future teachers with. So, yeah.
Are you hearing at all how they're doing? Are they sticking with it? Are they more likely to quit? Or how is these first years and months of being in front of a real classroom? It's very different from being on a Zoom call. How have they adapted? Yeah,
I am not sure like how many, like percentage or like exact number in terms of like what the teacher retention rate is like. I think that would be something that is definitely worth looking into. because it's not only the teachers who haven't had these experiences, but also students who didn't have experience in being in school, right? And they were doing virtual school at home. And when you put those two things together, it's even more challenging. Yeah, but at the same time, there's a big teacher shortage. So a lot of teachers retired, or the challenges that COVID brought was a lot. And for some teachers, that was too much. And so we have a lot of empty seats to fill. And whether it's substitute teachers or generalist teachers, or I think we are seeing, we're really needing more teachers in schools and classrooms right now.
What are your favorite ways of fixing that problem? I know that I'm working on a story now on the governor's budget, having a lot of initiatives, and the legislature creating a package of bills, but what's on your wish list?
My personal wish list, this is an area that I am interested as well, thinking about diversifying the teacher workforce. So I think we need to plan ahead. That's thinking about high school students. I have had some students who had the opportunity to shadow or work with young children, so that they had a sense of, what it's like, and whether this is something that would be interested in investing, a lot of time and resources to become a certified teacher. So I think thinking kind of early on, before the freshman year of being in a higher ed institution, I think that will be critical. And also, there are a lot of tests, a lot of bars for these teacher candidates to cross, and one of those that is not there anymore is at CPA. Those are expensive, very time consuming, and it was very impacting the student teaching experiences a lot, even through COVID. That was one of the big issues. So I think thinking about, are we making it difficult for people who are passionate about teaching to become teachers? Of course, we want to have standards, and we want to raise the standards so that we have quality teachers, but how does that translate into policies and different things that we're making these teacher candidates to do? When it costs over $1,000 for different exams and different tests that they have to take outside of, besides paying tuition and all that, it's a lot. It's a lot of burden on the teacher candidates. So I think those are some of the things I think we can address.
Let me encourage the folks in the audience to drop some questions in the chat so that you can leave as a satisfied customer. If there's anything that you're curious about, that you want to know more about, that we can help address, please let us know, because that's what we're here for. And also, Joe, if you have any that you wanted to drop in as well. And I want to ask Debbie on what kinds of questions are people bringing to you among the folks that you work with at SPAN, that they need self-advocacy work and guidance on, that are particularly pandemic related? Are you seeing folks coming in? Yeah. Are you seeing folks coming in?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with like Dr. Bossard, or Kim-Bossard, I'm sorry, mentioned, was just the staffing shortage. And so, and to help, and schools not being in compliance with providing one-on-ones or support staff, placing students in appropriate settings due to them not having appropriate staff. All that's staffing related, and that's become a huge issue. Not following the IEPs. There's a huge issue around inclusive placements. So, in order to provide the least restrictive environment, free and appropriate education in a least restrictive environment, very often that requires support staff. right? And the appropriate teaching staff. And there is a teaching shortage, especially for special education teachers. So that has become an issue, so for school districts, in order for school districts to be compliant, they had to have the staff, right? And so, while, that's a real issue and you can't, parents still have the right to expect a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And so very often, they're very understandably very impatient with school. So it is a real problem, because in the meantime, these students are missing out on what they have the right to. And we're not just talking about teachers either. We're talking about related service professionals, speech and OT and PT. All of these are also in short supply. And so yeah, I think a lot of the challenges we see are around staffing shortages. We also are seeing a lot of questions around engaging families effectively. That was something that was also highlighted during the pandemic, was the importance of engaging families, right? So we saw when students were at home, especially for students are young, that were whose parents had to sit by them or be in the room, to help keep them focused, keep them on point while they were learning, relationship was really important. And so, and talking about pre-service education, that piece, that family engagement piece was highlighted, the importance of our educators being effectively trained around family engagement. So as a matter of fact, NAFSCE, the National Association for Family School Community Engagement, has created core competencies for family engagement for pre-service educators. And they've created micro credentials for pre-service educators as well. Information if you'd like in the chat. But this is all part of an overall educator preparation framework for pre-service educators around engaging families. Because we know that when you're engaging families, it addresses so many of the barriers to effective communication and education. Like, so for example, chronic absenteeism. When families are engaged, chronic absenteeism, we know, goes down. Academic achievement goes up. What else? Postgraduate outcomes improve. So we know that family engagement is essential. It's an essential instructional strategy. However, we know that a lot of pre-service educators really are not educated around the importance or how to conduct family engagement. So that was one thing that was highlighted during, and with my work, we were very excited because we were like, people are going to get it now. People are going to really see why it's so important to engage families. And they did for a minute. It's starting to fade a little bit. But, we were hoping that people would really start to understand and embrace the importance of engaging families, in schools and the same for families. We wanted families to understand the importance of building a relationship with your school district, with your teacher, with your administrators, in terms of improving outcomes for students, especially students with disabilities, right? Because that just goes such a long way to, avoiding some of those battles that parents and school districts get into around IEPs. When there is that relationship and you're able to sit down with an administrator or a child study team member and say, look, this is what's going on, and how can we address this problem? How can we address this challenge? Instead of it being, we like to say, instead of it being, us against you, it's both of us against this challenge that we're seeing, right? And so when you have a relationship with your school district, when you have a relationship with your child's teacher, when you have a relationship with the child study team member, then you're able to sit down and kind of collaborate to address these issues. And so all that is a result of effective family engagement. And so we understand, we see that it is an essential strategy.
Can I make a comment piggybacking on what Debbie shared? So during the pandemic, especially when things were, when everything was virtual, spring of 2020, fall of 2020, and for a couple of years, I taught a course that goes with students, senior level student teaching. So it's a seminar course, and there's a lot of relationship building across and also with me. And one thing that I heard a lot from the student teachers at that point was how they were, how it was difficult to engage family because, and in some sense, being asked to pull back a little bit when they want to do projects that would involve family members, because they know that the family members have so much on their plate. They're trying to work full time and keep eyes on the kids, and there could be sick family members, or there could be just so many different things going on that if they were to send something home or try to do a project, engaging different aspects of family experiences and knowledge, that would be too much. So it's kind of, it's unfortunate. I think student teaching is a great time when the student teachers can really practice their skills and hone their skills about how to engage family members, reaching out to them and building relationships. But the pandemic also, I think, discouraged student teachers from doing so, just because there was just so much going on in family lives of their students.
Thank you. One of the questions in the chat is having to do with possible solutions and constructive approaches to these problems that you're identifying. And I know when I'm writing about situations that are overwhelming, I need to have some solutions in there for my own sanity and hopefully for the sanity of the reading audience. What are the things that you're seeing that make you think that there's you'll get through this and may get through it better and stronger, or is that too much to ask for? Or at least hope to get back to somewhat, if not normal, at least get the students what they need on an innovative fashion. Are either of you seeing things that are causing you enthusiasm and hope?
One thing I want to share is communication with family members and flexibility, different tools that people try to use, trying to establish that relationship with families and keep the learning going. And whether it's virtual tools or just different ways that people use, just being very creative, right? So that we can maximize the time and opportunities that they've had. I think that was one of the silver linings that came out of COVID. I think that gives me hope that when there's adversity, I think we try to figure out ways to address it. And I think I would say all the teachers were learning as they were teaching during the pandemic, because they had to teach in ways that they've never taught before. And I think that kind of innovation, creative energy is what gives me hope.
Good, good. Debbie, how about you? Anything come to mind? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so for me, and I think so much has come out of the pandemic. So for me in the work I do, a lot of it has to do with technology, right? The use of technology. We, on the START project, we made use of Zoom and other platforms to host parent meetings, which gave a lot more access, provide us with a lot more access. We do now statewide roundtables statewide family parent leadership roundtables, which previously we had done in person, countywide, and but we were hearing that parents wanted the opportunity to connect with families statewide from other counties, from other districts, to talk about special education parent advisory groups and some of the other challenges that parent leaders were facing. And so during the pandemic is when we started doing online statewide parent advisory, parent leadership roundtables, and they were really, really successful, and they continue to be. We are able to connect with so many more parents now. Because parents don't have to worry about babysitters. They don't have to worry about, getting dinner, that they can just tune in and listen and participate, which is great. And I don't know if I want to call it a downside, but the flip side to that is we're also learning about, and this, this is not something that's unique to SPAN. I think schools we're realizing this too, is the digital divide, right? That there are a lot of parents that don't have access to high speed quality internet, that don't have access to devices, that don't have access to all of the benefits that internet access provides. And that is, at this point, I think in our culture, internet access, internet equity and access is just, it's like not having a phone, right? Almost, it's, at this point, because you have access to telehealth. It's for seniors. You have access to relatives and family members that you might not have access to. I've been part of the Digital Equity Access Project in New Jersey, and representing families of students with disabilities, but there are other folks on the project, and some of them represent seniors, some of them represent veterans, some of them represent, and there are just so many folks that depend on or need broadband access in order to function, right? And to have access to all of these social and emotional benefits that internet equity. And so there is a $2 billion internet equity access fund of money that's coming up, that the Digital Equity Technical Assistance Resources or Technical Assistance Plan that is being created in New Jersey. And I would encourage folks to, and I think I provided Joe with the one pager around that, the digital equity access, digital equity resources. I would encourage your journalists to talk about that, because a lot of people don't really know that it's going on, and they have, and they are having, talk sessions or input sessions. People want to know, what's important. Why is this important to you? Why is it important for families, parents of students with disabilities to have access to internet or broadband access? And we're not just talking about students either. We're talking about young adults with disabilities, who may, this may be their only way to have employment, to be employed, is to have digital broadband access, so all of these things are so important. And I think a lot of this came out of the pandemic. I think that the conversation around the digital divide is something that came out of the pandemic. And that's something, and I think it's not good that we had this divide, but I think the fact that it was highlighted is a good thing, because now we're addressing it. Mm-hmm. That was part of all of this money that's being made available was part of the infrastructure bill. And so that's huge. That is really huge. If we're able to effectively provide these people with broadband access and devices and capacity building that they need to access, that's life-changing for a lot of people.
And is that from the infrastructure bill or from any of the COVID funds that came down during COVID?
I believe, and like I said, I was just brought into this recently, so I don't want to misquote, but my understanding is it's part of the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, awesome. Can either of you talk at all about how the money has been spent that's come down through the COVID relief funds? Are you aware of how local districts have been faring with that? I know I've seen some really interesting data on, the tutoring, high impact tutoring in specific places working well, but not overall throughout the state. What are you seeing as ways that districts have been spending that money? And it's on my to-do list for stories, but I haven't done a deep dive on it.
That's a really good question. I think just because, you know, the money was earmarked in different ways. Like there were lump sums of money that school districts were able to spend, but that they knew wouldn't continue. So they didn't want to spend on something that they would have to, you know, continue, that they didn't want to build it into their budget because they knew the money wouldn't be there. So a lot of it was spent on the school infrastructures like HVAC systems and building up their own, providing a one-to-one device access for their students. Some staff was hired, additional staff, but the sad part about that is now that staff is no longer there because the funding is gone. Right. So that was some of the stuff that I've seen. I don't know. MinSoo.
Yeah, I think the fact that the fund is not continuous, as Debbie said, I think that's definitely key because it only has a short. It's like I don't know if it's a fair analogy, but like a Band-Aid, you put it on when things are bleeding really hard. So I think that's difficult for school districts or even higher ed institutions to plan around. I know on the higher ed level, there are different funds that students enrolled in higher ed institutions could apply to, because so much was disrupted that people may not have been able to continue higher education without the help of those funds. But that was only for short-term usage. So I think thinking long-term, I think we'll have to think more creatively about grappling with these issues brought up by COVID.
Right. And for the audience of journalists here, what stories would you like to see coming out more on these topics, either for the hyperlocal journalists who are covering individual districts or for the journalists covering different communities? What are your, what's on your, if you could assign them to look into something, what would you assign them to look into?
Can I just say I was looking in the chat and somebody put in, because this is another topic that we see a lot, is how does all of this affect immigrant students in New Jersey? Because that's huge too, especially when you're talking about immigrant students of immigrant parents of students with disabilities. I could tell you stories that that are heartbreaking. Parents in IEP meetings where they don't speak the language and they don't really understand what's going on with their students. And I think that in terms of language access, I think language access is huge in education. When we're talking about, back when you were talking to MinSoo about what are some of the things that we would like to see as part of a wish list or something. One of the things that we had talked about, I was part of a roundtable with the Latino Action Network. I think that's the name of it, LAN, I believe, the Latino Action Network, right? And one of the things they brought up is that we need more multilingual child study team members, right? We have parents of students with disabilities that are from so many different countries, and not only is it just a language issue, but it's also a cultural issue, right? And I had one parent tell me that just because she felt like she was judged because she didn't speak English. They were focusing more on her and not her child, even though she was very well educated, but just the fact that she didn't speak English, they judged her. And so the focus was on her and not her child with a disability. And so I think that cultural responsiveness, especially in New Jersey, I don't know, I don't know the demographics of other states, but I know in New Jersey, a lot of our school districts are very, very diverse. with our, our Latino populations, our Arabic populations, our Southeast Asian populations. So I mean, it's an issue, and one of the things we had talked about was providing incentives for child study team members and other educators of more diverse backgrounds to take these jobs in schools, to take these educator jobs or child study team member jobs, for school districts to recruit more diverse child study team members.
One thing that I want to point out is, as Debbie said, the school demographics in the state of New Jersey for students, it's very diverse, but it's not reflected in the teacher workforce and administrators. So I think that's a big question, big homework that I think all of us need to address. Yeah, and that's definitely, and the whole COVID situation, even without COVID, I think working with students from immigrant families, it's difficult because their parents don't have the experiential knowledge of how the system works in the state, in this country. So I think even thinking about recruiting teachers with immigrant background, I think that would really help not only build the relational bridges, but I think that would allow teachers to build professional repertoire, thinking about what's invisible, because people assume certain things to be normal, but it's not, it's not clear for everybody how to get services, or whether they can request a translator, or what they can do in order to ensure that their children are learning in school and have access to all the services.
Terrific, thank you. Joe's raising his hand.
Hi, yes. Dr. Kim-Bossard, your comment just reminded me about a new journalism and reporting collaboration that was just launched in New Jersey called Segregated. And I wonder if either of you could speak to the state of segregation in schools and what role you see that playing in the difference in learning outcomes and how that still persists to this day. We could start with Dr. Kim-Bossard, and then I'd love to hear from Debbie as well.
So one thing that I want to share is that I'm working on an interview project with Asian American teachers in pre-K to 6 classrooms. So one thing that's coming out is all these teachers who are under the same umbrella of being an Asian American teacher, they come from such different backgrounds depending on where they grew up in and where they teach. They may be the only Asian American teacher that the students that work with will ever have. And I think seeing such lack of diversity within the state of New Jersey, depending on where you're located demographically, it really, that has been in the forefront of my mind. Yeah. Whether you're close to the New York border, or some people are able to kind of navigate spatially a little bit different, but others I think are very local and based in that very local community. So yeah, that has been coming up a lot as I'm talking with teachers who are having that firsthand experience of growing up in the state of New Jersey, many of them, and also working in schools that are predominantly white or not diverse at all.
So I'm sorry. So what are you saying their experiences for the teachers that are coming out, they're growing up in New Jersey and they're working in districts that are not diverse, you say?
Yeah, there are a lot of teachers, I should say it's a mix. Some teachers grew up in areas that are not diverse at all, but there are also teachers who grew up in very diverse areas. But depending on where they find jobs, sometimes it's a big shock even within the state of New Jersey that they have to readjust what the expectations are for themselves, or how people expect them to be as as a professional, as a teacher, but also as minoritized individuals. Yeah, so it's very, very interesting, I think, to say the least, the different communities that these teachers have been part of, and how different depending on where they are.
So, I mean, I guess my comment would be, but all right, so where should I start? So my comment would be that I think that, back to what Tina was asking, I think that the lack of diversity in the teacher population can be very impactful in not such a positive way. Often, I think a lot of times it leads to disproportionality in identification for special education for certain students, also in discipline, which students are. But my question is, I have a question too for being a teacher preparator, a teacher educator. How much time, if any, is spent talking about cultural responsiveness, and because like you said, I think the numbers are like really skewed. Like 80% of teachers are white women. Is there a conversation around meeting students where they are and being culturally responsive in terms of teacher preparation, or does that get brought up?
Yes, certainly. But I think the larger question is, one class doesn't solve the issue, right? Yeah, so I think we need to think about how to have that conversation throughout. And I think the next question is 4 years enough, or 5 years enough to change perspectives, or all these students come in to teacher education programs with different predispositions, and we provide these tools, different classes, different conversations, different resources to help them see things from different perspectives, and for them to have different kinds of student teaching experiences in different contexts, and so that they will be able to become culturally responsive teachers, right? But I think it really is also a question of how it's taught, besides what is taught. Yeah. I think I can go on.
I think you're probably, that's a good answer, and I understand that. I think it's really a conversation though, an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I think diversity in teacher education as well. Diversity in teacher education. I started on the interview project I mentioned because a student told me, an Asian American student told me that you are the only Asian teacher I've ever had, and she's from New Jersey, and New Jersey is considered to be more diverse compared to other states. So yeah, I think we have a lot of homework individually and also collectively for the benefit of the students we work with and also the teachers.
And I just wanted to add, another student, the same student that I had the conversation with about, the middle school student. She's very insightful, and she talked about microaggressions in the classroom. She said that she and several other students had experienced them, as a result of the lack of diversity in the teaching staff. And when you think about that, and how is this affecting our students, we really, like you said, it needs to be, we have a lot of homework to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if I could piggyback really quick, I know I see in the chat that Joe said he wants to ask one more question, but one of the things that COVID brought up is the issue of diversity around race, ethnicity, culture. And I would love to see people in the local media talk about that a little bit more. One of the teachers that I interviewed last summer was talking about how an ethnic restaurant was vandalized. It's right across from the school. So everyone sees something like that, and then how do they process it? I think that's a big question, for not only the students, staff, but also family, community members. So I think when we have local events that are not just local, I think the media can really bring that out and use it as an opportunity to talk about like microaggressions or vandalism, or all these different kinds of violences that I think have come up to the surface even more or so. I think they're being recognized more because of COVID.
Right, and and I would add to that, even during COVID, when the Black Lives Matter protests were going on, I mean, that was a huge issue. And in classrooms where I know in my area, and I know a lot of areas where the classrooms were predominantly were very diverse and oftentimes predominantly African American, but the teachers were not. Those were very uncomfortable conversations to have, but they were important conversations that needed to be had. I mean, this is huge, all over the news, and even on Zoom, I know that it was challenging. It was challenging.
Yeah, and some teachers were concerned that when instruction was taking place virtually, that family members maybe in the background, or right. I think that sensitivity is also raised because it's not just the students that they're speaking to in a classroom, but there may be more ears that are listening to, and I think teachers really have grappled with, how do I talk about something like COVID? For Asian American teachers that I've talked to, some of them have chosen to bring resources in and address it directly, and others did not. So it's a personal decision, but at the same time, it's very professional as well. And I think every single teacher, from whatever perspective, whatever experiences that they're bringing in, I think we make a conscious decision, whether it's, yes, I will, I decide to make my classroom collection more diverse, more inclusive, and talk about these texts as the main text for read aloud, or just keep, continuing on with the status quo of how things have been for years, in spite of all the recent events that have highlighted issues that needs to be addressed.
We are nearing the top of the hour, so I do want to be conscious of your time. I do have one last question, and I think you already, both of you already touched on this a little bit, but from the teacher's perspective, I'm on Zoom more than I care to admit, and I also teach at Montclair State. I'm a relatively new professor. I've taught for 2 semesters. But good Lord, is there a gap in digital literacy with these folks, especially and even in the School of Communication and Media, and it is like pulling teeth getting folks to even understand muting and unmuting themselves. Now, of course, we've all, been there ourselves. It happens every once in a while, but at a real core level, it just really feels like from the college to the primary school level, teachers just were not technologically prepared to make that transition. And it feels like they have not been supported by their administrations in providing professional development class and learning opportunities to get them up to speed, which then obviously trickles down to the lack of quality that they're able to deliver to their students in a virtual environment. Is anybody working on this? Are there resources out there that you've come across, or are there really stars who are pioneering new ways to teach the teachers this kind of stuff. I think one of you mentioned that you were a teacher preparator. Debbie, was that you? Is that
No.
the same? No, I'm sorry, that was you, Dr. Kim-Bossard. Can you speak to either of you speak to that at all?
I would say our student teachers became stars when everything had to be done virtual, because when they were paired with mentor teachers, some of them, felt comfortable navigating the digital space, but others were not. I see I've seen a lot of collaboration in that sense, which I think is good. On the higher ed level, at my own institutions, there were different trainings depending on people's comfort level, different tracks that people could sign themselves up and get trained. But I think just like teaching, right? I think we have our own affinities, right? I can't be my mentor teacher exactly. So I think even with the same training, I think the outcome that we walk away with, they look different. So I would say over the COVID pandemic, there have been a lot more different kinds of resources that teachers have become aware, and things like Seesaw or different kinds of tools, interactive tools that teachers are adopting and actively using. So I think there are more out there, more available, and I think people have more knowledge and more experience using them. I think the question is, moving from where we are now, where the instructions have become mainly in person in grade schools, how those things will unfold, whether they will continue to be useful, or whether we go back to where we were. So I think the diversity in terms of instructional quality using virtual resources, I think it will inevitably vary. But I think the accessibility, availability, I think have certainly those things improved over COVID. And muting and unmuting, it's tricky with kindergartners and first graders, second graders, but there's a mute all button, right? For people who are hosts. So there are different magics that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was huge. It was like from March of 2020, when everything shut down. I mean, this is just personal. In our school district, there was no live instruction, right? Everybody was doing everything, asynchronously. So between that June of 2020, I think a lot of the teachers, to their credit, did a lot of studying and sharpening their skills, so that when we opened in September of 2020, most of the classes were live instruction, via Zoom. But they had really done their homework in terms of so that just to speak to the dedication of the teachers. And
yeah, I didn't mean to like crap on teachers who are struggling with this. I hope that
no, but it was a real challenge. But to their credit, they really stepped up. And I think that moving forward, I think that using that digital platform, I've seen it already in a lot of districts where instead of having days off, due to snow days or other emergencies, now they're virtual days. So, you don't lose those instructional days. People just are able to switch more seamlessly from in-person instruction to virtual instruction.
Yeah, and there's also hybrid instruction too, which is even trickier.
Yes.
Okay, I have to leave it there. This has been a very, very informative and engaging conversation about issues of learning loss and the impact of COVID-19 on New Jersey schools. And we touched on several different topics. We talked about funding, talked about parental advocacy, things like teacher preparedness and addressing the digital divide. These are all like compelling topics that we will continue to discuss in the future and certainly work through and hopefully address so that we can improve the learning environment for our educators and for our students and their families. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Tina Kelley, for being our host. Dr. MinSoo Kim-Bossard and Debbie Esposito. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next Not Your Same Old Sources event. And until then, we'll be sure to share resources from this discussion with you all. And everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.